Hello, and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, College Admissions, a Look Inside and a Look Ahead. This is our 20th Global Virtual Forum that we've had since March. I'm Allison Geary, Deputy Director of the Commission on Public Schools at NEASC, and working with me today is Jeff Bradley, Director of the NEASC Commission on International Education. We are so pleased to see attendees from over 40 countries listening in today. Today's NEASC Forum, like all past webinars, will be recorded and made available on the NEASC website, along with any resources used during the broadcast. Please use the hashtag NEASC Forum when posting about today's forum on social media. Presented in partnership with the New England Association for College Admissions Counselings, today's discussion will focus on the impacts that COVID-19 has had on college admissions in the U.S. Through the lens of admissions professionals and a high school college counselor, we'll take an inside look at where the process is today and where things might be headed for both the short and long term. For many of our K-12 schools in New England and in more than 80 countries around the world, college admissions is often a topic of interest. Even more so right now, 9 months into a global pandemic that has disrupted schools across the spectrum, forced the cancellation of standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT, leading colleges to shift their attention away from using standardized test scores in their admissions decisions. With a recession underway, financial pressures are greater than ever, making access to college harder for some families. So the issues that we have to address today are pressing and numerous, and we'll do our best to get to as many of the questions that were submitted prior to the webinar as possible. We'll also be looking at the Q&A, so please make sure to add your questions in the Q&A, and you can upvote questions that you want to have answered by clicking on the thumbs up icon next to each question. I'll join you near the end of the webinar, but for now, I'd like to pass the conversation on to my co-host, Jeff, who will start the introductions and moderate the webinar. Jeff?
Thank you very much, Allison. Hello, everybody. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give a bit of context before we dive into the specific questions. So if you would, your role, your institution details, and your community status today as well. Are you in person, fully online, or in hybrid mode? And we'll start with you, Brennan, please.
Great, good morning. My name is Brennan Barnard. I am the Director of College Counseling and Outreach at the Dairyfield School, which is an independent 6 through 12 day school in Manchester, New Hampshire. And we are in person predominantly. We have some hybrid learners who are learning remotely, but for the most part, we are in person. I'm also the College Admission Program Advisor at the Making Caring Common project at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and helping lead the Turning the Tide in College Admission initiative. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brennan. Christina, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Berardi. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Admissions at Salve Regina University. We're located in coastal Newport, Rhode Island. And we are also in person. We've been able to, thanks to incredible efforts by our campus community, bring our students back. We do have a few students who have opted to learn remotely, so we do have some remote classes to serve those students as well, but we are primarily in person.
Thank you, Christina. Anthony.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Berry, Director of Admissions at Trinity College, located in Hartford, Connecticut, equidistant between Boston and New York. At this time, we have a hybrid approach. And so of the 2,100 or so students that we enroll, there are about 1,700 students on campus, with the remaining working and learning remotely.
Thank you, Anthony. Jason, please.
Good morning. Jason Hodge, Associate Director for Special Programs with the Admissions Office for the University of Connecticut. Uconn is the flagship for the state of Connecticut, so we share some area with the Trinity. And We're a 5-campus system, as well as a law school, medical school, and other graduate programs. We are a mix of on-campus learning and virtual this year, given our 24,000 undergraduates and subsequent large graduate population as well. It's a mix based upon lab science and other on-campus requirements. We're happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, Jason. And Amy.
Hello, my name is Amy Lee. I am the Director of Admissions and Assistant Dean of Enrollment at Southern Maine Community College, which is in Portland, Maine. And we are in a hybrid model, being a community college with trade and technical courses like automotive, HVAC, precision machining, culinary arts. Those classes are on campus, and other classes are online.
All right, thank you all. Well, let me get right into some questions. And from the registrations, we picked up a lot of questions having to do with standardized testing. So I want to start there. Now, according to fairtest.org, 2/3 of all colleges and universities today are test optional or test blind for fall 2021 applicants, meaning they don't require the SAT or the ACT, knowing the disruptions from last spring and into this fall. And I know that the entire University of California system was contemplating going test optional even before the pandemic. So many people wonder, really? Shouldn't I still take the SAT or the ACT if I possibly can? And Brennan, I wonder if you've heard that from your families. So I wanted to start with that. Is that a realistic concern by families? And then we'll turn it over to some of the colleges.
Yes, it's absolutely a concern. It's amazing to hear, despite all the kind of transparency on the college side about the role of testing in this cycle, that families are still really concerned about, does optional really mean optional, and will it disadvantage my child if they haven't taken the test? And so it's a real concern, and it's amazing to see the grip that standardized testing has over young people in this country, and the kind of obsession with it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, Jason, if I can go to you first with the big University of Connecticut system, what's your answer to those families concerned about standardized testing right now?
I mean, practical reality suggests that even getting a test at one point was a real challenge from a health safety concern, as well as an availability and access concern. And we do not want to put a student in a situation where they're at a disadvantage because they cannot get to a test site, or their personal health would put them at risk for taking a test. We have signed on to the pledge with NEACAC, and so many others have well, that test optional means test optional. And I know the trick. It's trying to understand how a 5-person basketball team would go up against a 4-person basketball team in NBA finals, but test optional is not new. Many people are unfamiliar with the concept because they did not apply to a test optional college when they were looking at universities. But we have a mechanism in place to give fair consideration if a student chooses to submit a test score or doesn't. We recognize that with a good majority of students last March, they were in a kind of thrown into a different learning style, a pass-fail system, a learning from home, something that just wasn't familiar right around the time they'd be taking their tests in the first place. So we're confident going forward, as this is not a new concept, that we can adequately and solidly review our students using all the other metrics, GPA, recommendations, activities, the qualities of the person, and make a fair evaluation and to help them get a chance at education.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and that's a good corollary, which is if the test is optional, then what is going to then maybe get more attention in the package, if anything? And let me move across the state to Anthony at Trinity College. Standardized testing, what are you saying to families?
Sure, thank you, Jeff. I do want to think back to 2015, which is when we went test optional, when we weren't thinking about pandemics, and it was just a matter of figuring out how to improve our process and expand access. At that time, it was very clear that we had the support of faculty, staff, and students to move in that direction. it was also clear that there was already so much anxiety surrounding testing in general that this was just one more way to hopefully address the stress surrounding testing in general. At this point in time, we made it very clear, and will continue to make it clear, that when thinking about the various components that we consider when a student applies, whether it be testing, whether it be the high school transcripts, recommendation, essays, the most important component for, I would say, most institutions will still be the transcript. Almost a 4-year record of a student's performance, looking at rigor, also considering trajectory of performance. And so that, I think for most of us hasn't changed. That's still the most important criterion. And so I think moving forward, that should really continue to be the focus, I think, for folks in our position.
Thank you. And Christina from Salve Regina, what's your story, and how does standardized testing now play a role for you all?
Yes, thank you. I mean, as Jason mentioned, and Anthony as well, we are a historically test optional institution. So again, this is not something that's new to us. We have adopted a very holistic review system. And I think the thing that is important to keep in mind is that colleges, more often than not, are really looking for those reasons to admit students, not the opposite way around, as I think students and families are fearful of. And so we're really looking at all the items that students are sending along to us and considering each of those for fit with our institutions. And we plan to continue to do that. At Salve, test optional certainly means that both in admission consideration as well as merit scholarship consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a good point about the merit scholarships, because that too is a process that often uses standardized testing in determining merit-based awards. Amy, what's the role of testing for you all in the community college?
Yeah, I mean, most community colleges in the country don't require testing for admission. In the past, we at Southern Maine Community College used it for placement. But like you said, not only is it a danger for some students to go take the SAT. I know my own daughter, who's a senior, had 4 SAT tests canceled. So it's not even that she doesn't want to go or we don't want her to go to take it. It's that April, May, June, and September were all canceled in our area. So we're seeing that students just aren't able to take it. So we're thinking about placement in a community college. Does a student need a developmental math or go right into a college level math? And we'll be looking, just like 4-year colleges that have had to shift, we'll be looking at other ways for that placement.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like if you haven't already decided to go test optional, you've gone test optional. And my guess is that the 3 of you that have had it don't plan to return to any situation where you would require the SAT or the ACT for applicants. And so the advice to families thinking about driving across a state line or two to take the SAT, you would say, don't bother. And I appreciate that clarity from all of you. So let's shift to another topic of concern, and I would say of some stress out there, and that is affordability and access. And it's a common refrain. We hear about it through the presidential campaign as well here in the US. And we know that as a result of the pandemic and even before that, many families struggle financially. And we also know that college is seen largely as a ticket and a necessity, and yet it's priced like a luxury. Now, in America, we've seen the statistic. We collectively owe $1.5 trillion in debt. In my home state of New Hampshire alone, 3/4 of college graduates recently graduate college with some debt. And that's according to the Institute for College Access and Success. So I'm curious to ask, what is your institution doing differently today to ensure that you are accessible to every qualified student? And why don't we go in the same order? Jason, if you wouldn't mind, from Uconn.
I don't know that we're doing anything differently because affordability has always been our focus. We instituted last year the Connecticut Commitment Program designed to ensure that in-state residents had tuition covered, meeting a specific threshold of adjusted gross income. And we hope to be able to continue initiatives like that. You know, we are, all of us, weighed against the notion that revenues at the universities are down, you know, because perhaps if you were residential focused and do not have your students living there, that may have been an impact. Or if your athletics programs were canceled, that may have been an impact. So there are some real realities I think that all colleges and universities face right now in terms of their operation. We're state institutions, so naturally our state revenues are down, as are many other in the country because of the current employment situation. So we are wrestling with the give and take to make sure that students have adequate access, even as our resources are a little bit more tapped than normal, but we will continue to grant as much aid in there, which I've noted earlier will be test optional as well, as we have in the past, as much as we are able to. Like we're just trying to make sure that students don't go into too much debt. It's a short-term, long-term. We hope for long-term recovery from this pandemic, but we also do know that we're going to balance a little bit, try our best to afford students as low a cost of attendance as feasible given our current circumstances. We did see an uptick in requests for aid and support last year. We know that will continue.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know that institutions like yours that depend on public funds are at equal, or if not more stress than private institutions that are more reliant on tuition and donations, because revenues in the state coffers, of course, are very much stressed in this period as well. Anthony, how about at Trinity? How are you supporting access and affordability for your applicants?
Thanks, Jeff. First, I would echo much of what Jason shared. I think even for private institutions, we are certainly feeling the pressure as well. But despite that pressure, we're still able to commit to meeting 100% of calculated need, not only for domestic students, but also for international students. So it was very important for us, despite the sort of the national landscape, to continue to make that commitment. We're also trying to learn more from institutions domestically by joining ATI, which stands for American Talent Initiative. We're also creating new efforts, new strategies to support both low income as well as moderate or middle income students and families. So it's our hope through revisiting our own financial aid packaging that will come up with some very creative ways to support middle income families. The other thing I think I wanted to mention is that just the paperwork to fill out financial aid or to even be considered for financial aid, I think internally can be a barrier. So we're also, in a sense, looking under the hood to see what can we get rid of. How many times will families need to essentially fill out the same information and content? And so our hope is that that will lead to more completion of financial aid paperwork as well.
You're here. I'm all for that. Less paperwork. Christina Berardi, please, on the access and affordability question.
Yes, you know, very similar here. You know, Salve has always had this as a focus, especially as a private institution. You know, we want to make sure that the value that students are receiving in our classroom is accessible to as many students as possible. I do think this year, because of the pandemic and because we have had families who have been directly impacted by it, we have been very lucky to be buoyed by some generous donors who have allowed us to give out more institutional aid than we ever have before. And we, you know, plan on being able to continue to do that as families are still very clearly impacted by, you know, their current income. This past year, with our small population of 2,100 undergraduates, we awarded $44 million in aid to our student population.
Thank you. Amy, in the community college, I want to ask a version of the access and affordability question for you, but also a question about the relative amount of interest that there is in the community college experience as practical training that may have drawn more people to the community college, or maybe not. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that effect that you've experienced.
Absolutely. So community colleges obviously have always been an affordable option, and even now more so than ever, if students say are learning online and had to stay at home, maybe the residence halls at their four-year college weren't open or they weren't feeling comfortable going, we have seen an uptick of students saying, well, if I'm just going to take my general education requirements like English and math and psychology, why not do that at a more affordable rate and then go on and transfer back to that school next semester or maybe next fall? So we definitely have seen an uptick in that scenario. But in general, starting at a community college, I think has maybe in the past had a stigma of not real college, but I think these four-year schools could also say they love transfer students, they welcome transfer students, and showing that doing well at a community college is the best way to show a four-year school that you're ready for college. So I think that thinking about that as an option to save a lot of money in your first 2 years and graduate side by side with a high school classmate who went right to that four-year school and paid double the money, to attend. So I think that it's a really great option for many students looking to save money any way they can and still get a quality education.
Thank you. And Brennan, sitting in the college guidance office at Derryfield School, are the questions coming to you from students and families different today, markedly from what you've heard in years past in terms of, where I can afford to go? What are you hearing?
Not markedly. I would say that there is more focus on schools that will offer merit money and and there's a lot, again, back to the testing question, kind of questions around how that will be tied to testing and how those decisions around merit will be made this year. But it's a real problem, and it's a real problem around access and state funding. And I think, New England states are especially challenged in terms of state funding. As you mentioned, New Hampshire is one of the highest for student loan debt. Connecticut and Rhode Island are also in the top 5. And Vermont and New Hampshire are among the lowest ranked in the nation for state funding of their higher education institutions. So it's something we really need to address and lobby our state governments for and really look to.
Thank you. I want to ask a question too about finances and specifically tuition. Many schools and colleges and universities have frozen or even reduced tuition, which is an unusual situation. Normally those tuition fees go up a few percent at least every year. So just a quick lightning round, if I could. And well, Brennan, I'll start with you actually at Derryfield. Tuition this year compared to last year, where are we? Higher or lower? Tuition for students attending Derryfield, 6 through 12.
Not significantly higher.
Significantly.
Percentage increase in terms of every year. Nothing. Yeah. Different.
Modest. Okay. Modest increase. Got it. How about Southern Maine, Amy? Going in order, reverse order here.
Sorry. No increase in our $96 credit hour tuition.
Okay. So you've frozen it. Great. Okay. And Christina at Salve?
We did have our, or may have our traditional modest increase, but we've also increased institutional aid.
Okay. Got it. Yep. And you mentioned that aid. Good. Anthony, Trinity College.
We were able to freeze tuition and reduce the meal plan cost.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And Jason at Uconn, what has happened to tuition this year?
Anticipated costs will adjust within the normal parameters as anticipated on our long-term plan.
Mhm.
This cycle, though, when we had students who were not on campus, obviously we weren't charging room and board, and we made adjustments to fees for students who were not on campus for this cycle. So we are conscious of the cost when appropriate.
Got it. Okay. And the difference between being on campus and being able to take advantage of all those facilities. All right, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. I know that many in our audience are listening in and looking in are coming in from outside of the US, and they are interested in NEASC. Many of them are schools within the commission that I help to oversee, the Commission on International Education. And these are schools that might be offering the International Baccalaureate, IB diploma, or a US style high school transcript and diploma. So the question, let's start sort of generally here. I presume that most of your schools admit and recruit students internationally. As you know, the impact of this pandemic is felt globally, and that same concerns that New England families are feeling, they're feeling around the world, and we work in more than 80 countries. And so I'd like to give each of you who have something to say about this, and we'll just, if you can just speak up or raise your hand. What, if any, impact has the pandemic had on how you are interacting with international admission candidates? What effect has it had on the TOEFL, the exam that is typically required of these international applicants? So what is that scene and what is that picture like today, and what message might you give to your international applicants? And again, if you would just raise your hand and let me know. Jason, was that a thumbs up? Okay.
Sadly, the pandemic was not the beginning of the challenges for recruiting international students for this cycle, but I will refrain from going any further. I think everyone understands the circumstance. But we know that international students continue to be a very important part of our fabric at the University of Connecticut, and I think broadly for all universities in the country that embrace students from outside the borders. We, in order to engage with those students, we are doing the same kind of virtual recruitment we do for domestic students, just at very unusual hours. So we have staff working at 4 a.m. To 8 a.m. doing recruitment programs. We have staff working at 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. We will have one on Black Friday at 2 a.m. to talk to students in, I believe, the Middle East. So we are still doing what we do for domestic students as much as we can. We also have a staff person in China who's actively engaging when possible with visits. The situation seems to be a little bit better there. So we are still actively recruiting and actively speaking to international students about the possibilities of when coming to the university. We were afforded the opportunity to have some of our international students spend the first semester in a local university, and hopefully have them be able to be with us for the spring. In terms of our process, we are test optional for international students. These questions come up in the chat, but we still do ask for IELTS, TOEFL, or Duolingo when appropriate. And these tests, we find it can be done a little bit at home in a less confined space and with less number of students around than in a school. Hence why the SAT, ACT is a little different, as we know that's a school day-driven event, but we find that some of the English language tests can be done at home or kind of in a different time frame. So we're still asking for that when appropriate for our students.
Okay, thank you, Jason. And I do see the question coming through on the chat as well about standardized testing for international students. Anyone else on the question of international recruitment in terms of what has changed or how that outreach is working today? Yeah, Anthony.
Thank you. The only thing that I would add, and would certainly echo what Jason shared, but I think the pandemic has really motivated us to work even more closely with alumni. And so for our students who are studying remotely and who are abroad, we are doing more with alumni who are also abroad, who can really help bridge the gap and help them feel more connected to campus. Additionally, we're working more closely with campus partners, particularly our colleagues in our student affairs office, particularly international affairs, to make sure that we can do a better job even of not only recruiting, but really helping that process, that matriculation process, enrollment process for our students. So we're trying to be very creative and proactive, understanding that these students are going to have a very different admissions experience as compared to previous cycles.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a very practical concern for international students, and some of your older students know this already, or freshmen who are supposed to be coming in, because the U.S. consulate abroad may not be open to issue the paperwork for a student to even come to the U.S. And there are days when I don't like my job, rarely, but to think of what you have to deal with admissions of international students who can't even get a visa internationally because the consulates are closed. And I know that's the case in China, which sends a lot of students to the US, to our high schools as well. So, I mean, that's a really practical situation. And I don't know if there's additional guidance or advice that you can share in this call about that. And Christina, yeah, if you would like to share some thoughts.
Yeah, I think we're all, very much on the same page. The good thing is we're able to offer a lot more resources virtually. But you're right, there's still that, very real problem of being able to obtain the appropriate paperwork or for students to travel due to travel restrictions. And I do think that, not just how the pandemic continues and none of us can fully predict that future, but also the outcome of the election is going to have a huge impact on whether or not immigration policies sort of revert back to where they were or if they remain more restrictive. So certainly looking forward, those are going to be two huge factors for that student population.
Right. So I think related to this question of disruptions caused by the pandemic, and I'm seeing this on the chat as well, and this involves not just international students, but domestic students as well. Before the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation for years really about the stresses on kids who feel it's important to stack their resume with activities and as many clubs as they can, to be busy every afternoon. And in my own neighborhood here in New Hampshire, it was great to see about the second week of the shutdown. It was early April and it was a sunny, warm day and there were kids out riding their bikes at about 1 in the afternoon. And I thought, isn't that great? Kids on a weekday, this was, riding their bikes and talking at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, looking very relaxed. These are middle school kids. So it has obviously disrupted plans for students to be busy and involved with activities. Now, many of those students not able to do those activities perhaps are feeling additional stress now, not being able to do those activities, not being able to market themselves as these well-rounded young people that they may well be. So again, I think it would be helpful to hear from our college panelists about what advice you give to those applicants that are wondering, I can't have that same experience. I can't be involved. My sports season was canceled. I can't do this other activity and what have you. So what maybe words of wisdom might you share with those students, please? And again, just if you would raise your hand or let me know if you've got something to add. Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
I recognize that many of these students have never experienced a global phenomenon before. Things tend to be local or national, but never global. And I think they don't always realize that we have experienced the pandemic as well. It won't, no admissions person reading an application will be like, oh, what happened for the last 7 months? Why have I been inside working as opposed to being outdoors? Like, we get it. And I don't think kids understand that we get it. We understand there's been disruptions. And I think we're going to review applications in the context that this is not how anyone would choose to live if they had a choice, but this is the cards were dealt. So I think it's a broad sense of understanding that they can't stack their applications. We hope that they have contributed to their families during this time, if they've been supportive, if a parent had to work because their situation did not allow for them to work from home, were they supportive of their families? Did they engage in some of the other community activities that they could reasonably safely? There was a time during the pandemic where there was a series of, let's say, disagreements with the way a number of things were going on in the country. Black Lives Matters, other things. Students were involved in that. And if they did, they can talk about those experiences. We have a combined, we have an sort of a combined BSMD program for students. And one thing that the committees always looked at was a pre-medical experience during high school, a shadowing or something. We know that's not in play because it's unsafe to be in hospitals unless you work there. We're sensitive to the circumstance. Talk authentically about your experience during the pandemic, and talk about the time before, because it's only been, for most people, 7 months, not their entire lives. What you do prior to the pandemic, it would be key for us to know as well. If you've done community service, if you've done involvement, if you've bettered yourself through reading or some type of activity, let us know. We're just not going to overlook the fact that these are not the same times as before.
That's a reassuring message, I think, and good to know. And I know that some of you are Zooming in here from home because you're not able to be in your own offices. So yes, the disruption has affected you as well. Christina, did you have something to maybe add to the conversation on this topic?
Yes, I also think an important part of this is for students to speak to what they hope to do in the future. We're just as much looking for potential in students, looking for students who are going to live our university mission, students who are going to continue to look towards ways to make a social impact around them. And so speaking to the things you hope to learn and you hope to do, I think can be just as powerful in a student's application as the things that they are currently participating in or not.
Thank you. Yeah, Anthony, please, Trinity.
Thank you. Just to quickly interject, I think I'm sort of welcoming the silver lining in this. I think having a major disruption that forces, I think, schedules to all of a sudden look very different, so that students are not in activities around the clock. I think it's time for a bit of a reset. I think when I think there's been burnout for quite some time amongst students in high school, and maybe this has been a period, hopefully, where they were able to have some more downtime, some more authentic opportunities to connect with friends and family and others. So I think this is also, I think, an opportunity, sort of alluding to what Christina shared as well, to do some storytelling. Tell us a little bit more about what your interests are, what are some of your anxieties, some of your fears, and not focus solely on a laundry list of activities. So my hope is that we won't go back to stacking resumes, and that we can sort of move forward with a new focus.
I appreciate that, Anthony. Thank you. And Brennan, I'm wondering, because you're there on the front line with some of these families, and I actually know some of those families at your school, who may be wondering, okay, how do I make myself stand out in this era when so much of my routine has been disrupted, and how do I manage this? So talk a little bit, if you would, about the stressors now on those families and students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Anthony really hit on it. And it's around this question of storytelling and what really, it's an invitation to students to focus on what really matters. Their character, their engagement in community, their level of involvement. So rather than this laundry list, and this is something we've really kind of worked on pretty intentionally around at Making Caring Common, around achievement pressure and kind of leveling the playing field in terms of access to activities and access to involvement. And it's not about how many things you can fit into a day. It's about how you're making an impact and how you're influencing others and how you're engaging with others. And so I think it's a real opportunity. And like Anthony said, I hope we're not ready to take the first train back to kind of the craziness. And I mean, some schools like MIT, for example, have limited on their application the number of activities a student can report. So, you know, they can only report 4 activities on their application. And it really prevents against a student trying to cram as much as they can into one day, and really focus on the things that they're passionate about. And that's what we work with students at Dairyfield to really identify. What are you most excited about? What are you doing that you feel like you're really in flow, you're really just alive when you're doing it. And those are the kinds of things that I think my colleagues here on the admission side will say they want to know about those things and what excites students and how they're exploring those things in more depth.
Yeah, great. And I do want to ask a silver linings question in a moment, but let me just turn to Jason real quickly for just a response, I think, to a question about some of our American international schools abroad.
Specifically, what aspect? Just to make sure I know.
Sorry, I thought, yeah, if the guidance to international schools looking at this question of how to present myself from abroad.
Yeah. And also the testing, I think, too, the testing for students at British, Canadian, or American schools.
Actually, I answered that question.
In the chat.
But I'll just...
okay, thank you.
It was related to testing, and particularly English language proficiency, that's just working on. We had historically not asked for proficiency tests for students who are being taught in English as their primary language. I think there was just some confusion there. That was around the IELTS, TOEFLs, and Duolingo. But in general, we do know that students are going to present themselves well. They're impacted as well by the current circumstances internationally. And we are looking to embrace as many as we possibly can. So, hopefully we can get your visa, hopefully we can get you here. And those students who we're allowing them to do an education abroad experience, we're looking to have them be here in the spring, assuming all conditions are solid.
Okay, thank you. And Amy, if I can ask you about how, if any message you're giving to students different from what you've given in the past, students who may be concerned that they haven't had some of the experiences or access to some of the resources that they might have had pre-pandemic.
I mean, we're really different, being more of an open access admission. So I would defer to my 4-year friends here of we're not 100% open enrollment, but very close to open enrollment. So we're not evaluating clubs and activities and letters of recommendation for admission to most community colleges.
So, and let me ask now about a practical question, it's the question of deferrals. So many students who are going to start their post-secondary education this fall said, I don't want to be part of first year of college virtually during a pandemic. I'm going to defer to next year. So the practical question is, does that mean that all those deferrals are already filling up spaces in next year's class? Meaning, if you're a senior this year, last year of high school, applying for next fall, you're going to have a more competitive situation than you might have otherwise had. So let me start with you, Christina at Salve Regina, please.
Sure. And I'm not sure if we are having a typical experience with deferrals. We have had very few. I think that is likely because we are in person. So when we were able to bring our students back to campus, we had the majority of our students decide that they would want to start on time. Because we've had just so few who have decided to take that option, it certainly won't in any way impact our acceptance rate to Salve for the coming year.
Okay, thank you. And Anthony, at Trinity, what if any, guidance or news might you share on the question of deferrals making it more competitive for seniors this year than it would have been in the past?
Thanks, Jeff. For Trinity, I don't think folks have a need to be anxious or worry. I think similar to Salve Regina, we have just a small increase in the number of deferrals for the spring. But I also think it's still pretty early. It's October 6th. We won't really know or have a good enough sense of what the applicant pool will look like until later this year, and obviously early next year. And so I would say just continue to focus on the things that you can control and not worry about deferral numbers. Because in the end, I don't know that to what degree that will be helpful. And so focus on fit, focus on all of the various things that your counselors tend to share with students. But otherwise, I think we're as much in the dark at this point as most folks until we actually begin to receive applications. So it's business as usual for us for now.
Thank you, Anthony. And Jason, how about at Uconn?
I think we experienced maybe 1%, probably less than 1% of our students wanted to defer. And of those who did, half wanted to go to the spring. So it wouldn't even impact the fall numbers in that way. And for typical reasons, military service, an opportunity to do something unique and exciting. Yes, some hesitancy around going to school in a virtual environment, and that's understood. But we don't anticipate this having significant impacts. And we've always had students taking a gap time. So that's built into our model. So I think realistically, there will be plenty of spaces for the incoming class of 2021. They will not miss out.
All right, thank you. I want to move to a couple of final questions. And the first one, which has already been mentioned, is about silver linings. And I think, anywhere you turn today and look at industries within education, outside education, people are wondering what good might come from this. And it's an important question, I think, for all of us to ask, and particularly in this fraught environment of college admissions. We, as an accrediting agency, have been involved with college admissions actually from the very beginning. We were founded in 1885 in order to create greater articulation between high schools and colleges. So we too, as an agency, are asking what good can come from these disruptions. And I'm curious, in your worlds of college admissions, what good, and I think we've already talked about some of those things, but if you could each speak to what good you see long-term in terms of benefits in the years ahead that might come from the disruptions of 2020. And Amy, if I could pick on you first.
I hope that we see more adaptable students. I think education, higher education especially, takes a long time to make changes, and many of us were thrust into things and forced to make changes very quickly. I've sat on committees for years and years and years and years trying to make a decision on something, and this pandemic made us bite the bullet and just do it. And so I hope that we see that that we can move forward faster without years and years of thinking. And then I really am seeing students become very adaptable. This class of 2020 that just graduated, and most didn't have their graduations or their sports seasons or their all those end of the year exciting things like proms, etc., we're able to move on to college. And while it's not exactly maybe at some schools what they pictured, that they're adapting, and it's just going to make them better employees and adults. And I'm excited to kind of see this generation move forward and be a different type of resilient student.
Teaching resilience and teaching adaptability in schools, that's tough. And we can all speak to that who are educators. And this pandemic has indeed been quite the teacher to all of us. Christina at Salve Regina.
I think in addition to what Amy mentioned about on the college side, us learning how to change more quickly, which higher ed is not always known for. We also, I think the biggest silver lining for us is that we have a lot more virtual and digital resources available to students, and especially students who might not have the ability to come visit our campus. Students from much farther afield from where we're located. So those distance students are more rural students who we might not always be able to go and visit in person every travel season. There's so much more available to those students to really get to know our campus and our community, to connect with us individually as admission counselors. And so I'm hoping that a lot of that work that we've done to respond to this pandemic continues to help students in access moving forward.
Thank you, Christina. And Anthony, please.
Amy and Christina haven't left much for me to contribute. Done such a great job. I think I will stick though with the silver lining being really forcing, I think, admissions professionals to be more creative in the work that we do. After working in admissions for over 20 years, I've certainly realized there's been a sort of a tendency to do what we've done previously, but with this major disruption, it's given, I think, me and so many others an opportunity to truly look under the hood, from admissions to retention to the application process, and review all of our processes and question them. And so I think for us moving forward, I think being creative, but also being very analytical, strategic, and inquisitive about our own mission, our own goals, I think has also been very fruitful as well.
Great, thank you. And Brennan, Derryfield School, silver linings from all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a kind of system-wide look at higher education and admission, I think it exposes some of the real inequities that exist and give us real opportunity to dig into those. And like many schools have been for a while, but I think as a kind of a larger process, it invites us to say, okay, how can we do this better, and how can we, how can we look at the disparity in kind of counselor loads across the country, and how can we make better, allow for more access to quality information around college search and college match, and how can we do that in a really large-scale way? I'm hopeful that we don't blow this opportunity and that we take advantage of it. And because I think there are some real silver linings in terms of connection between high schools and colleges, connection between family members, between students and teachers. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Yeah. And in hands of people like this here today, I think there is hope that some of these silver linings will come to pass. And Jason, silver linings for you at Uconn.
I think it's a couple things. I do think it's reframed the conversation around virtual education. I think online learning was kind of seen as that or a stepsister to the traditional learning model. But I think there's a real wake-up call to what it means and what it can do, notwithstanding when you click the wrong button on a Zoom chat. But in general, I think it has made people more appreciative of what that can mean. academically for students and where we could be to enhance the educational experience. I think it's really reframed the value of the student learner, and that universities, when having to find a way to reach out to the students, had to really critically rethink what our education, what we're providing and how we provide it. And I do think we're going to see some vast improvements coming out of this. And finally, I think it really has reframed the conversation around access. It's easy to talk about access when it's just that inner city or it's just that low-income district, but on a national level, with access to technology being so inconsistent, it's sort of a wake-up call again that there is a real have-nots, and really a lot in the middle with inconsistent access, and that has to be considered not just in education, but broadly and policy-wise. I think we definitely will be having some real focus on education policies coming out of after November, to say the very least.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wake-up call, and let's hope that we all stay awake. So we have about just a few minutes left, and let me ask you unfairly to give me in just 30 seconds, please, or less, each of you, final advice that you would give to listeners, to families, to schools, applicants. 30 seconds of advice just to sort of close this out, this panel on college admissions. So, and we'll go in that same order of Amy to start with, please.
I needed a minute.
I can come back to you if you want.
I'm just kidding. Oh yeah, Brennan wants to go first.
Okay, go ahead, Brennan. You go first.
Okay, I would just say ask why. Ask why at every step of this process, this experience. Ask why you're going to school, why you're doing the things you're doing. Be intentional. Kind of throw out the rankings. That's another silver lining. I think this is going to kind of a little chink in the armor of the rankings, but just ask why are you doing this, and why are we doing the work we are as professionals, and why are schools educating students, really looking at mission, and so that's my 30 seconds.
Thank you, Brennan. Thank you, Brennan. All right,
All
who's
right,
ready? Amy, go ahead.
I was just going to say to trust and believe in the admissions offices and the admission counselors that you're speaking with around test optional, especially if it's saying that they're test optional. You don't need to really keep asking, are you really sure? Are you sure? Are you sure I shouldn't fly across the country or to another country to take the SAT? That's not what they want you to do. Some schools have not gone test optional. So if they've gone test optional, they mean it, and to check in with them for reassurance, but to really move on and do your application without those test scores.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, Christina, final advice?
Yeah, I think the key on the college side this year is really flexibility and compassion. And I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind that everyone on all sides of this are just trying to do their best. And so if there is a way that we can help support you, whether you're on the K through 12 side or you're a student or you're a family member, please reach out, because we're happy to continue to be flexible and compassionate throughout this process.
Thank you. And Jason, and then we'll go end with Anthony. So Jason, please, final thoughts and advice.
The conversation is always around who doesn't get in. I like to frame the conversation around that if we don't admit students, we close as colleges and universities. We are looking to bring students in now more than ever, and it's going to provide more opportunities than ever before. So it's going to be this could be a positive for your next couple of years of students.
Thank you, Jason. And Anthony.
I think I'll just use my time to further support what Christina has said, and that is to make sure that we continue to communicate. Higher ed is an industry where relationships are very important, and so I think to continue to reach out, whether it's over the phone, text, chat, if there's a question, if there's a concern, talk to us directly. We'll figure it out together.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Allison, Gary, for just some final wrap up, but this has been a very productive session with you all, and I really appreciate it. Allison.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you all for participating in the conversation today, and to all of you who listened in and contributed your questions and shared your thoughts. There was a lot of good conversation in the chat, as well as resources that we hope will help you moving forward. So for our panelists, my co-host Jeff, and everyone at NEASC, I'm Allison Geary. Thank you so much for joining us today.